Most people think hitting the average savings number for retirement means that they're safe, but there is one mistake a lot of people make. Now, I get it. Averages can be a really good rule of thumb. So when you're thinking about retirement and you're looking at, okay, how much does an average 60, 65-year-old is supposed to have? It could be pretty comforting or not comforting, but it is a good benchmark to see if you're making progress, right? But averages can be misleading because averages take into consideration a very large population and so many different outliers. It's kind of like when you're in fitness. So I'm a personal trainer, so I talk about averages a whole lot, but you do have to take consideration that there's going to be a lot of other variables that come into play. If the average amount that people in general can bench press, that really doesn't cater to how much you as an individual should be able to bench press. And in the same light, when you're talking about averages when it comes to numbers, yes, you can take the entire population of America, but we also know there are variables into people's income, their lifestyle, where they live, their expenses. It really doesn't gauge how much you ought to have in in consideration of where you are physically and what type of expenses that you have at that point. Now, let's look at the real numbers so that we get a bigger picture, so that we can get a better understanding of where you should be. Now, in Fidelity's most recent research, people between the ages of 60 to 64, the average amount saved up for retirement is about 264,000, but the median is 84,000. Now, if you think about it, what that means is more than half of Americans have less than less than about 90,000 saved up for retirement. Now, if you think about it, you, the viewer, could be living anywhere in the United States. So if we go back to the first number, 246 average, right? 246, if you retired in the Midwest, that could get you pretty far. But if you have 246,000 in, let's say, New York, San Francisco, any of these larger metropolitan areas, that money's going to evaporate pretty fast. So the averages gets distorted by outliers. Famously, Peter Thiel saved up about $5 billion in retirement. Now, should you compare that number to, let's say, 246,000, or even one of the many Americans who have less than 90,000, or who's right at the cusp of the median, 84,000. So there is this disparity that when you talk about and you're looking for reassurance in the average amount saved up for retirement, you still have to take consideration all these other factors. So the biggest mistake that I see with working with many clients is, especially if you're in that age demographic of 50, 60, 55, 60, 65, kind of within that group, is that, let's say that you have saved up 500,000. Well, wonderful. We still have to factor in your expenses. We still have to factor in where you live. Do you live in Iowa? Do you live somewhere in Minnesota? Or do you live in California? Do you live in Hawaii? There's going to be all these different factors like cost of living that will make your nest egg pretty much evaporate at different rates, right? So you can probably live very comfortably mortgage free in the Midwest, but you may have to fork over a down payment and a significant property tax bill and maybe a mortgage if you choose to live in a state that, or in a location, or even in a city where the cost of living is a lot higher. The second question to ask is if you have guaranteed income. So, do you have Social Security? Do you have pensions? Do you have annuities? Yes, you have enough saved up in your Roth IRA, your 401k, but do know those do fluctuate. You are required to do those distributions, but that can fluctuate. Okay, so I want to make sure that you start your foundation, you have guaranteed income, and then everything above that, all of the variable amounts, those are going to be great. You could do a rough estimate of what those minimum distributions are going to be, but start with the foundation first. And the third question is, does my savings reliably cover that gap? So once you have figured out your guaranteed income versus your total income, okay, there's going to be guaranteed income and then variable distributions. Okay, you can take that, but understand you're guaranteed, but also take a look at your expenses and do those align? Do those actually match up? And are you able to afford these expenses? Because if you cannot, then I guess it's pretty clear that maybe you should make some adjustments to your expenses or your cost of living. Maybe it is time to relocate or downsize or not support family members. I come across a lot of that. So when you do your financial health checklist, what I'm just explaining, you want to make sure that it is personalized. So every 50, 55, 60, 65-year-old that I work with, every single one of them is different because every single one of them lives in a different location. Every single one of them have different lists of expenses. So the bottom line is you want to make sure that you kind of take consideration averages, but know how they actually calculate averages. There's always going to be this set of billionaires who are going to skew that number anyway. And I'm going to assume if you're watching this, you may or may not have $1 billion, but you want to make sure that you understand the reality of things. Second, you want to make sure that you do the math. Make sure the math is mathing when you're actually calculating your income versus your expenses because every plan is going to be personalized. And number three, once you get clarity over your own personal numbers, kind of like when you work with a personal trainer, you have a personalized program and everything ends up being really clear. Once you start getting momentum and say, okay, these are my milestones, these are my goals, this is what I need, me and my family needs, me and my spouse needs, everything becomes crystal clear and you become more motivated and you develop that momentum and you can retire happily. So don't let all of these news articles about the average retirement number or how much the average savings that you should have by age, it's always going to be plus or minus because you know how the math actually works in order to get averages anyway. If you have any questions, go ahead and click the link below and go ahead and get your free download. I pretty much give you a plan on how you can achieve financial freedom.